coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. Big one today. We are joined by Liviu Bird, head coach of Oly Town FC in USL 2 here in the States. We've had him on before. He's talked about analysis in his previous role as performance analyst with MLS club Columbus Crew. Today we're going to talk about game models, and more specifically we're going to talk about how to impact those game models in a short period of time in a condensed season, which I'm sure a lot of you listeners have experience with. So it's a really, really good topic. Liviu has been generous and kind to share an example of some of his game model, and we talk about that today in the interview, and we show some clips here. If you would like a copy of that game model as an example, you can get it for free on the Modern Soccer Coach website. It's on the link below. It's an easy download. I hope you enjoy this interview. If you find it useful, if you find it valuable, please give it a like and please make sure you subscribe. I appreciate all the support. Here is Liviu. Enjoy. Liviu, thank you so much for joining us again today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always fun.
Interesting topic. So first time we've done game model ones, but I don't think we've done a specific topic title like this, and I think it's a good time to do it because I think over the span of 5 years, game models have become more mainstream. They've become definitely more popular, and that's a good thing. But also then I think what we need to start talking about is how to communicate them better, how to be more efficient with them, and how to almost differentiate yourself as a coach within it. So that's what I wanted to get into today. We both agreed on the topic, which was transmitting clarity in a game model. So I think we're both on board that there's an issue with this clarity area. First question I wanted to ask you was where do you think coaches go wrong with clarity in the game model?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when you look at coaching, and for me, it's a kind of a 3-step process, right? It's I think I learned this alliteration on my UEFA B course. It's me, method, and message. So me, so who are you? What do you stand for? Kind of what's your game idea? What are your non-negotiables and principles, both on and off the pitch? The method, so how do you want to bring that out in terms of how your team plays? No wasted time, right? No throwaway sessions or exercises. Everything has tactics or that tactical element in it, as we commonly refer to it. Everything has a purpose and a direct transfer to how you want your team to play on the weekend and in the 11-11 game. And then finally is the message. So how do you get your message across? How do you connect with players? How do you reach them? Can you reach them? Plenty of coaches, I think, are good on the first couple where they have a good idea of who they are and what they want, but they don't know how to take that final step and then transmit it. So in some ways, this is the most important one because without it, the rest is wasted. So for me, the biggest wasted time is in the method, for sure. So in coaches who maybe have sessions that don't relate to how they want their team to play exactly, where they do an exercise just because, or they do something that I used to do this as a player, so I'm going to do it as a coach or whatever. Everything has to have a purpose. It's like all those, when we talk in the corporate world about all those meetings that could have been an email. It's you don't want players walking away thinking, wow, this training session doesn't really have anything to do with what we're trying to do. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your players' time. Every single thing you do needs to have purpose and clarity. And I think that's where a lot of us go wrong. And, sometimes that's the question I ask myself all the time is, all right, was that useful? Or, ideally in the planning stages, is this useful? How? Does it relate to what I want the team to get out of this week in training? And then again with the message, so how you get your message across, or how you connect, or whether you can connect with players on a certain level. There's a lot of wasted time and I would just say missed connections in that part of the process as well.
Very, very interesting. My first thought is me and method. Like I see a lot of people, because they want the me to be player focused and almost popular, the method is up for negotiation, so to speak. For example, if Guardiola puts down a juggling competition, into a trash can. That looks good online. And if you've got full-time access to your players, nothing against having a little bit of
fun. But if you don't have full-time access to your players,
25-minute part of your session and you've got them twice a week, what you're saying there, like, that doesn't align to a number of things within philosophies.
Yeah, correct. And I think so the environment that I coach in now, at the USL League 2 level specifically with Oly Town FC, we have players for USL League 2. So we have a 12-week season, and that's including our preseason, if you want to call it a preseason. This past year, including the playoffs, it was a 12-week season and a 1-week preseason with a friendly game leading into our first league game. Players coming and going, so college players who come in late, some players who leave early. You get players who in the middle of the summer maybe are out of contract who need a place to play. So it's just your roster's in constant flux, and it's not, like you said, it's not the high level. You have them every day. You can sort of play around with things. And, this will be a fun activation for today, and we can spend, or a recovery day after a game. We can spend some time doing this. In a lot of ways, at USL League 2 level, it needs to be run more like a national team, where it's, you get them for a limited period of time. You're trying to get certain things across, and you're trying to in a way that's going to help you get results, because at this level it is results based as well. Obviously it's a development league for players, but you do have to get results or else people won't come to games and all that. So, in this environment, like I said, there's really no time to waste. And from the very beginning, it's always my goal is that every single session has that purpose, and it has, specificity. We know what we want and how we want it done. Planning, we always know what we're going to do before we do it. Nothing's done sort of off the cuff. The detail of it, right? You have to be meticulous and what do you want to get? What are your coaching points? All that stuff. And then, that also leads into, I think at this level, the professionalism. So the high standards and the demand that you have on yourself and your environment, the opportunity that it gives to players to, it's a short season, but, give everybody a chance to sort of experience what a higher level environment is, ideally. The tone that you set every day and how you approach training and games and the care that we show for every player, that all leads into, again, I don't want them to waste their time. The club that I coach at right now, we're about an hour south of Seattle. We have players who come from Seattle to come to training. I don't want them to drive an hour and think, wow, that was a waste of time, and now I got to drive an hour back home and I didn't get anything out of that. So all of that kind of wraps in to what the daily sort of environment looks like.
A lot of game models today are very idealistic. I've been sent, I don't know how many I've been sent to look at. A lot of them are, build like Barca, press like City, transition like Real Madrid, and it's almost like, but you're not going to be able to do that with players' context. Your context is very specific on that short, condensed window, and from a recruitment standpoint, you mentioned those different types of players in different areas. How much of your game model did you have to adapt for the context of a USL League 2 season?
Yeah, I think if you look at, so Gary O'Neill, the Wolves manager, was on Monday Night Football on this past Monday, and he talked about this a lot, where he said, you need to have your game model, you have your idea, but then you also have to be able to strip it back appropriately for the group of players that you have. And, like I said before, it's important to know where you're willing to compromise and where you're not, and you have to know yourself, you have to know your principles and your non-negotiables. In my game model or blueprint document, it's way more detailed than it needs to be for any particular environment. There's a lot of words, specifically, and those are for me more than they are for the players. What the players get is way simpler. It's stripped down. It's refined for the specific group we have. It's simplified so they can hopefully remember it or recite it from memory. 3-5 simple principles instead of 20, for example. A lot of times we have to remember the game model is ours as coaches. It belongs to us. It's for us more than it is for the players, and they have better things to do than memorize a bunch of words that I put together. Again, for the guys in my environment, a lot of them are college players. last thing they want to do is have to study more when they're in the summer and they're, hopefully off of school and trying to play. They need simple messages, things that they can bring to life and execute. And then if there's time and there's the ability to do so, then you can build more layers on top of it. But you have to start with the stripped down basic. This is where it really helps to know what you want, because you can then look and say, these are the most important things. This is what I really want to get. So Nick Nurse, who's the head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers now in the NBA, he wrote a great book when he was the head coach of the Toronto Raptors. And I read it, and he talks in it about simple principles. And he coached in what was the D League, which is in some ways the USL League Two of the NBA. He said that when their first season ended, he sat down and really said, okay, how do we design systems and terminology that can be learned really quickly? How can we refine our system to what these players can handle in this amount of time? And same thing in that league. Players come and go, and they're back and forth from the NBA and all that. And so he said that they spent a good amount of time just deciding what they were going to call their plays and what they were going to, their offensive plays and defensive coverages, numbers or colors or other things they could easily remember, and establish those principles. And Herb Brooks, who was the famous 1980 U.S. ice hockey coach who beat Russia, Miracle on Ice, he had a similar thing. I remember reading a biography of him, and on the forecheck, he had one principle that was real kind of illustrated this. It was backsides or eyeballs. So if you can see the player's backsides, then you can go in and you can press. And I think this is something that applies maybe in our game as well. But if you can see their eyeballs, so if they're in control of the puck and they're looking up the ice and they're in controlled possession, then maybe you can't press as hard because then they just play right through you. So just simple things like that where you can really simplify, but also not lose the content that you want in your simplification.
I don't want to challenge and knock. Coach education has done a lot of really, really good stuff. The one thing that I say the difference between coach education and real life coaching is that coaching is really, really time sensitive. And you're talking then about the impact, how to, like the D League analogy, how to get this to the players as quick as possible, condensed season, without having them study and doing all that thing. And I think more of this should be challenged on coach courses, because then that makes you think about how you communicate and how efficient you are with your communication. So are you saying then that less is more, almost from a step one? Listen, I've got 50 principles. You're saying, yeah, can you get those down to 3, 4 each moment or less, or what's a good number?
It's tough because the initial having your 50 principles, your built out complete picture, if you want to call it that, that's important, because you have to know what the complete picture is. You have to know what that ideal is, so that you can, what's most important. And then obviously from there you simplify. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having a very detailed, like I said, my game model is there's a lot of words, there's a lot of diagrams and pictures. And again, it's more for me than it is for the players, but I feel like I need that reference. I need something to look back to and be able to say, okay, here's what we want in this phase. And in an ideal world, if I had 4 or 5 training sessions a week and a 6-week preseason and all that, at one point this past summer, I was sitting there with my coaching staff, and we were watching a training session, and it was finally starting to click. Guys were connecting, and the combinations were good. And I looked at it, I go, we're about 6-7 weeks into the season. At this point, we would be in a professional environment, we would be about ready to play our first regular season game, versus in this environment, we're halfway through the season. So that just shows you kind of the difference, is that you have to have something that you can, that is that complete picture, but at the same time be able to strip it back when you need to and say what's the first step. And I think that's really, more than anything, that clarity of communications. Where do you start? Because that's where every team is going to be at the beginning, is at the very basic, especially if you're not working with players like Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland and those guys. It's going to be a lot more basic, and it's going to be from a starting position that is way closer to zero than where they're starting from. And so having that complete picture is important, but then obviously understanding what's the basic level and how do you layer on top of one another. That's one thing that I do think good traditional coach education does, is that you have instructors who teach you how to layer coaching points and how to layer principles on top of one another.
The chances that some of those players coming to the team will be exposed to some form of game models, like, I suppose it's pretty high. It's probably, I would guess, 50-60% of them know reference points and principles and that there. If you were to put yourself in their shoes, where do you think are the differences when they get into your environment in terms of where do you focus more on? Like, where would you say a player is impacted that's different maybe from another game model?
It's a good question. Everybody, obviously, every coach has their own emphasis and their own way that they see the game. I stress a little bit more on the simplicity of the way that they play, and in terms of, I feel like we've gone in this country in a lot of ways. What I see is a lot of players now who want to play that possession-based game, but I think they misunderstand what the purpose is, right? Because the purpose of the game is to score more goals than the other team. So what I see a lot is players at that higher level who their body shape is, they're oriented backwards, so they have to play a backward pass, or they play a sideways pass, or the wingers come really deep to find the ball when really, I would want them threatening the last line so they can get in behind, that sort of thing. So I think for me, it's in the attack, again, if we're going to strip it back to the real simple principles, which I think is important. First of all, is positioning. I call it rational occupation of space. Obviously that's kind of a positional game model term. From there, you play forward if you can. I think that's the big one. If we can get into the front half in 6 passes or fewer, then I'm happy with that. I think a lot of times, again, we do these 6 to 10 passes, and we talk a lot about back half possession, and that's all well and good, but then what happens after that? You only get to the halfway line, and then you have to go the other half of the field to score. So being able to play forward if you can, get numbers around the ball, counter press when you lose it. Those are real basic elements that I try to implement from the start. Again, that's just the attacking side. Defensively, you're looking at something different, but it's, for me, again, I try to keep things simple and keep the ideas basic enough, but also you have to have a framework and you have to have a reference point for the team to build off of.
Hello, coaches. You asked and we delivered. One of the most popular requests we get on this channel is pass and warm-ups. And it's not the regular slow way to be passing exercises. No, what coaches are looking for is the one-touch, intricate combination type exercises with that emphasis on quality, technique and tempo. So we have decided to put 30 of these exercises together and release them on an ebook that you can get access to right away. If you're a youth coach who's looking for some extra technical work, or you're even a college coach or a club coach working with older players looking for some warm-up exercises or some pictures to align with your tactical objectives, we can help you out. Our new ebook, 30 passing practices, is available on the link below. It's a PowerPoint that includes video, session details, and coaching points on each slide. Tons of ideas, tons of different pictures, lots of adaptions. You can get it on the link below or at modernsoccercoach.com/shop. Thanks for the support and enjoy. That individual piece, you talk about the body shape, and I think that's a really interesting point there, where, of course, you see some of the Guardiola clips where he's maybe talking to Sterling, or he's talking to someone on the training pitch, and he's moving his, you can see the hands going everywhere. He's a very animated coach. He's talking about, and he can kind of work out what he's trying to do. But when you're in a condensed season, sometimes then you don't have the relationship base built up with that player in order to make an impact. And again, something similar to a tactical model, the more time you have with a player, generally, the better it is with that player understanding you, and vice versa. What are some keys to making individuals better in a short period of time, or connecting with them and getting them into that tactical mindset?
Yeah, it starts with the recruiting process. So every player that is on our squad, I had from the very beginning have had a personal connection with in terms of at least, a phone call, face-to-face meeting, something where it's okay, if you want to come play, I want to explain to you a little bit about who I am, why I want to do this, how we want to play. Does this sound good to you? Can you see yourself fitting into it? So from the very beginning, I hope there's a feeling that players understand, okay, well, this guy cares. He actually cares about me. It's not just about, oh, we want to win games and that's it. It can't be that can't be the game idea. That can't be, oh, we're just going to win, because that's not really an idea. That's a result. So having, getting players to understand from the beginning what we want and what we're looking for. And also I stress from the very beginning that, especially in this environment, you have to have a lot of empathy for your teammates. So understanding that, we have other things going on in our lives, that it's not a professional environment. Nobody's paid to be here except for the coaches. And then, even then we're not paid a ton. And understanding that, there's other things that might happen where somebody maybe can't make a training session. That doesn't mean that that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to start on Saturday if they were going to anyway. It just means that maybe they got called into work, or there's something else going on that they need to take care of today and they can't be at training. So that empathy is really important. In terms of once you get them there and we're talking on the field, yeah, individual development always happens inside the framework of a team. So I try to stress to the players from the very beginning that, a rising tide raises all ships. Within the team context, if the team does well, it's going to make every individual look better as well. So we're always trying to get to a place as a team where the individuals are going to do well. I don't expect that players won't have their individual goals. A striker is going to want to score 20 goals, and they're going to want to be the leading scorer and all that. And that's important for them to have individual ambitions, especially at this level, which is, again, it's a development level. But hopefully there's a way where we can get the team intentions and the team goals to serve the individuals, and we can get the individual goals and intentions to serve the team. So if there's a player who has that ambition, I'm going to try to put them in a position to make it happen. But at the same time, that's going to help us, because obviously if somebody wants to score 20 goals a season and they do it, that's going to help us. So as a very basic example. So things like, if a player is on 2 goals and they're playing against a team that maybe is weaker and it looks like he could score 3-4 goals, instead of, oh, we're going to rest you and pull you out. No, let's keep him on for 90 minutes and see if he can score a couple more goals and help him out that way. And again, that also helps the team.
Yeah, great clip this morning. I saw on the overlap. Gary Neville's got Craig Bellamy on this week, and talking about Bobby Robson, and he's basically, there was a situation that he got in a bit of trouble, and he had made up mind that if Robson went at him in the meeting that he called into, that he was going to go back to Bobby Robson, but Robson blamed everyone except Bellamy, and even though it was his fault. And then he asked him a couple of weeks later, like, how did you know that I would kind of react it differently if you had approached it differently? And he just laughed and said, I work with Romario, experience. Yeah. And it just made me think, the more situations that you're in, and he might have got that wrong 5 years ago or 1 year ago, and we're all in these, the ability to learn and the ability to pick up little nuances in communication off the pitch are just as important as a game.
Yeah, and I saw that video you're talking about, and it's really interesting how the best coaches are able to, again, they get these individuals, these mavericks. Obviously Phil Jackson liked that term a lot. He wrote a book about himself called Maverick, because he was one of those. He obviously worked with Dennis Rodman and players like that. You get these guys who, if you have the ability to get their individual goals and their individual personalities to fit into what the team is doing, and you get the rest of the team to understand, this guy's a little different, but he's going to help us. And obviously it has to work and it has to be true. It can't just be somebody who's doing whatever they want for the sake of it. But if you can get everybody to sort of meet and kind of, again, rising tide raises all ships, if we can all sort of come together and raise the level of the team within what we're doing individually, then there has to be a little bit of room for people to be themselves. We can't expect that we're not trying to, hopefully, we're not trying to create robots. We're not trying to create, the same, clones, copies of, it's not copy and paste. It's everybody should be able to and should have room for some individualism and to be themselves, ideally in those best environments.
It's that balance, isn't it? We were texting about the Denise interview with Jamie Hamilton about the balancing between structure and creativity or freedom, which I think there's a fair bit of this going on in the coaching community at the minute about how to do it. And Jamie is quite clear in that Denise does have a framework. It's not just, I don't think there's any coach that's playing at a reasonable level that's going out and chuck, although I would love to see it, chucking the balls out to saying, go on ahead, play. It probably wouldn't work. So where are you flexible in that freedom part? Is it in areas of the pitch? Is it with certain positions? Is it certain moments? Or is it no freedom allowed in your style?
Yeah, I think what you said, I think, is really important in that there is a structure. There's always a structure. There's always some sort of, if you don't want to call it structure because it seems too rigid, then maybe there is a framework, there's an idea, and then how the players carry that out should be up to them. So the communication piece, so the tactical principles, the basic ideas need to be the same so that everybody's on the same page. And so, if for example, a center back decides that he's going to cross over and dribble and do whatever he wants, and he's going to make runs up the pitch and stay there, that doesn't help anybody. So, there has to be an understanding that, okay, here's the framework, here is the basic idea. But then for me, I always want to allow individual players to make decisions that make sense in the moment. So if a player receives a ball, my coaching points often end up being, okay, freeze, have a look at this. If we position ourselves like this, there's option 1, option 2, option 3. Which one do? You choose. It's based on what you see, what you think you can pull off, what the opponent gives you. So what I like to do is in all situations and in all parts of the field, every phase of play, I like to, when it's possible, give options. So to tell players, if you set yourself up like this and everybody follows this framework, then you can have option 1, 2, and 3. And then, okay, pick one. And then they pick one. And, if we're doing a walkthrough, for example, they pick one and go, okay, now ball is here now. So now, based on this and based on the framework, option 1, 2, and 3, go ahead and pick one, right? So ideally, there's always an ability for players to inject their own decision-making, to have their own, to make their own stamp on the game. And you want players who are willing and able to do that. And again, it's development level. This is where those players learn. This is how you get in that higher environment and figure out what works and what doesn't. And, then we look at it maybe on film or, either as a team or individually and say, okay, here's option 1, 2, and 3. You went for option 4, which is not really an option. And here's why, right? So, just again, giving options, giving choices within the framework is ideal. It's not, nobody wants to be, okay, do this, now you do this, and then you do this, and it's like this every time, no matter what. I just don't think that really works anymore. Maybe it used to a little bit when it was a little bit more, okay, here's what the coach wants, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to think. But now it's always, and I always encourage the discussion as well, where players look, okay, but why? Why do you want me to do this? Why do I move here? Why do I need to stay here instead of moving here or whatever? And again, that goes back to the game model, having that complete picture. And you can say, okay, well, here's why, because I want this, this, and this. And I've found that usually if it makes sense, then players will follow it, even if they're not exactly enthusiastic about the outcome. If they're okay, well, it's not exactly what I want to do. I want to try to dribble through 10 players, but I see it. It's cool. I'll do it. So.
Yeah, I'm guessing that with your background, there'd be a strong analysis aspect of your, I don't know, if your game review, just overall environment. Where does analysis kind of fit in that day-to-day processes?
So you have to be a bit creative and be willing to solve problems on the fly. So for example, this past season, we trained at a public park, and it's not like let's go in this theater room and watch a video now. So what we did instead was there was like a picnic shelter right next to the field, and thankfully they had power. So I would bring my laptop, I'd bring an external monitor, and we would sort of crowd around. Thankfully it was a decent size, and we'd sort of crowd around, and it would be short video sessions. I'd try not to make it more than 10 or 15 minutes, because otherwise you got players in a really uncomfortable position for an hour, and again, then you're wasting time. But sometimes you have to be creative. You bring the iPad out and maybe show 2 or 3 individuals. Say, hey, you guys come here, watch these 2 clips from this game. Let's talk about this. So being able to, video is the most useful tool in any environment. I use it with the U12 team that I coach right now. There's just ways that you have to be able to be creative with your environment. It's not always going to look like, you go on YouTube and you watch, look at Man City's training ground in this room that they have. I mean, every top level team now has like basically a movie theater in their training ground. Obviously, not all of us have that. So there are ways that you can be creative and use the technology at your disposal to use the video, which, again, if you use it correctly, it's the most important tool that you have.
Are you ever worried about too much information, too much tactical information in that short period of time?
Always. It's the biggest, one of the questions that I ask every day. Is this too much? Do they need to see this? There's a lot of games, especially when you play Friday, Sunday. It's not like, what are you going to do on the Saturday? You're really going to sit them down and do a full game review on the Friday game when they play again on Sunday? Probably not. Again, this is a situation where maybe you pull a couple of individual clips and then in the locker room before the Sunday game go, hey, I noticed this, check this out, maybe think about this. So it's one of those big questions and even during training sessions, there will be times when I'll be standing there, say, with one of the assistant coaches, and he'll go, yeah, but look at this. And then I'll just go, it's too much. Just let it go. That's not important, right? It's when, and again, this is where we take it back to understanding what your basic principles are and what you're trying to get out in such a short period of time, where you go, it's too early for that level of detail, too early to add that layer onto this sort of cake that we're making here. So really understanding what you want and how to get there, and then when maybe you need to pull back and go, okay, that's not ideal, it's not exactly what we want to see, but we sort of have to let that one go, because you can't go from A to Z without going through all the letters in between, sort of thing.
Glad you used the cooking analogy there, because I think that's really, really important it's not a science in terms of, you're talking about layers and understanding when there's so many contexts to, again, understanding where the team's at, where people are at, fatigue, mental fatigue. Very, very difficult to approach that tiering information for a season.
Yeah, and you hear top level coaches say this all the time in press conferences, where they get asked, what if this situation happened again, would you react the same way? And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things so many pieces of the context and external factors that go into it. Are they, like you said, are they tired? Are they, or have we won 3 games in a row? Have we lost 3 games in a row? Where are they up here in terms of their thinking process? Are they physically fatigued? Are they in a good place where they can take on that information? Or maybe do they need a wake-up call? And so you can hammer them a little bit more with that kind of stuff. There's just so many things that go into it that you pick up these references as best you can, and ideally you say, okay, well, that didn't work. Next time in this situation, I might think about this factor as well. Maybe I didn't consider X, Y, or Z, but next time I will. And again, it doesn't mean that you'll change what you do, but it means that maybe next time you'll think about something else before you decide to act. And that's, I guess some people call that experience. I think it's still part of theorizing your experience. So you can't, it's not just blindly doing what you've always done or what somebody else tells you to do or what you once saw Pep do on YouTube. But it's important to have those references sort of built up to where ideally you know in the next situation what you'll at least look at to maybe make a different decision or maybe make the same decision.
Alongside the facility and even staffing, you've got a short window, so you don't have 20 S&C coaches and rehab and all that there. But I'm guessing you've got a game model that's, you're looking to be expansive in the build and you're looking to win the ball back quickly and press high. Then obviously physical demands are quite high. How much of the physical demands go alongside the game model? And if so, how do you manage that in a short period of time of training it with little to no preseason?
Yeah, everything's connected. There's no, I know traditionally we think of, the old 4 pillars model: technical, tactical, physical, psychological. And I think a number of people and a number of sources have debunked that in recent years. So I don't think I need to go into it now, but there's every single element is always present. It's, okay, it's 100 degrees this week and we're playing on turf. Are we going to high press? Probably not, or not for 90 minutes anyway. Things that we need to take into consideration: the fact that we have limited subs in this league versus in college. It's not unlimited, but it basically is, because there's re-entry and there's all that kind of stuff. Things that you do need to understand within the context of what you're trying to do, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily change what you do or what you want to do, but maybe it changes how you get there. So if I want a team that now suddenly has limited subs and it's hot, instead of, college season in the fall when it's, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but in Washington State, it's like 45, 50 degrees this week. It's freezing up here. You can press for a little bit longer because it's almost like, okay, I want to run, versus in the summer when it's 90 degrees here and we're still playing on turf. Probably a little bit of a different idea. So this is an example of how I did kind of tweak what I want to do. I have a couple different ideas in defending from the front, where one model where it's maybe a high pressing idea, and then another one where it's a little bit more middle block. Let's be patient. Let's wait for a couple of triggers. And early in the season, last summer, I came out and said, okay, we're going to high press this game. I think this team that we're playing against doesn't play out of the back very well. We'll go kind of man for man in some ways, and we'll press this and do this and force them here. And I looked at it on video. I looked at it on a tactics board. I go, okay, this looks good. It'll work. We did it in training. It kind of worked, at least enough to where I thought, okay, well, in a game situation, they'll get it. They'll get there after a few reps. And then honestly, it was a total disaster. We shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have done it. Should have realized that, again, all those factors: limited preseason, limited training time during the week. I think we did 1 training session on it, maybe 2, before we went into the game and tried to do it. All of those things should have been red flags to me to go, nope, it's not going to work. Don't do it. If we had this team for 6 weeks and then it was our first game and we'd been able to work on all that, then maybe. So after that, I sort of, and this is where it comes in, the empathy part and being human and a little bit vulnerable. After the game, we looked at some video as a team, and I told the players, I said, okay, first things first, I'm sorry. This was on me. We lost, by the way. I said, this was on me. Shouldn't have done it. I thought it was a good idea. It obviously wasn't. We're going to do something different going forward, and next time we play this team. And so, and again, I think that creates a little bit of buy-in, because then they go, all right, this guy actually cares enough to first of all think about these things, and secondly to not just go, oh, well, you guys didn't do this. I told you to do this. Why didn't you do this? Or maybe you sit back and go, that was a bad idea. So, all of these things sort of wrap in, and again, this is why it's important to have those options, I think, in the game model, where we go, okay, here's a structure. Either you do this or you do this. Is it on to do this? So is it on to high press? Maybe not. And not just because of the game situation, maybe because of the external factors. Maybe it's not on. We can't do it. So then, okay, option one is no longer an option. So now what's option two? And it's not, when Pep came into Man City, everybody was talking about he needs a plan B. He needs a plan B. There needs to be and this idea that your plan A and your plan B need to be polar opposites, again, I think has been proven very wrong, where now it's not, plan A is to play out of the back and plan B is to play direct. No, okay, maybe plan A is to play out of the back doing this. Plan B is to play out of the back doing this because that's not going to work or it's not an option. And then maybe plan C is a step even farther. And okay, now we're going to try this because this and this aren't working. So within that is, and they're all connected and they all make sense, because if you do this one instead, where you have a plan A and a plan B that are polar opposites, suddenly the players are going, wait a minute, we were doing this and now we're doing this other one. What is this guy doing? Why there's no consistency here? And so I think that's another piece where coaches maybe go wrong with this. And it's another way to let players in on your thought process and go, okay, this isn't working. Here's why. We're going to do this one instead. If this one doesn't work, maybe we'll try this. And they can hopefully follow a little bit, and they follow along and they go, okay, it makes sense. It's logical. It's rational. It's not 1 week, one thing, next week, another thing.
Yeah, that example you used about like a game plan that's not going right and it's probably for all to see. Well, how do you assess a game plan that is maybe in the middle, where it's not easy to see whether through result or who's on top? Like, how do you judge the game model immediately after it?
Yeah, one of the things that we did really well this past season is we were definitely a second half team. So we had this ability to, we'd play the first half and it would go however it would go. And then we were able to sort of analyze in the moment and at halftime get the right messages across, that in the second half we were able to improve. You have to be able to analyze during the game and see where, what your areas of emphasis were for each position, each unit, each area of the field. And in the first half, you have to look and say, is that working? Is it working in the front half? Is it working in the middle third? Is it working in the back half? Is attacking, defending? And if it is, then great. Maybe re-emphasize it. If it isn't, then you need to understand why and how you can fix it quickly.
MLS environment, Columbus Crew, and the success you had there. What are some takeaways from managing all those different facets of the day-to-day, the science, the data, the analysis, the scouting, obviously the coaching? What are some things you went away from there and said, I'm definitely using that?
The biggest thing that I thought we did right was that everything we did, the football idea came first. So what we wanted to accomplish on the field was always number one. And you can get bogged down in all the other things at times, the data and the science and the all of that stuff, the periodization, where you are in the season, what you can do. But the football idea has to be number one, and everything else has to be in service of that, not the other way around. I think that was the biggest thing, because we were working with some pretty heavy constraints as well, because it was the COVID season and all that. So there were some really heavy sort of restrictions. And I thought that was one of the reasons why we had so much success, because we were able to take those ideas and those restrictions and say, okay, we still want to play like this. So how are we going to make that happen with these resources, the sort of issues, the external factors that we have, and how can we be creative and problem solve to make sure that on the field we still get what we want out of it?
All right, let's take a look at some of the presentation and that you sent over, and then a couple of clips as well. So we'll put this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can, if you want to get this extra 20 minutes, we'll just put it up on YouTube. Okay, nice front cover with the big trophy there, like that. All right. For those that aren't familiar, macro principle, what on earth is that?
Yeah, I would categorize that as the big idea, which I think technically is, I think if you translate it literally, that's what macro principle means, is big idea. That's the big idea when we have the ball. So For again, this is just a snippet, but you can see that even on this slide, there's a lot of words, right? Advance and controlled positional possession to create goal scoring opportunities. So again, this is more for me than it is for the players. But when I'm planning sessions or when I'm thinking about it, I can look at this and say, okay, controlled. So that's a big word. You have to have control. For me, it's all about control. Positional possession. So it's positional. It's not relational, like we just talked about with Denise and what Jamie Hamilton was talking about. And then create goal scoring opportunities, because again, the point of the game is to score more goals than the other team. And then if you look at each phase here, which is basically just thirds of the field, that helps you kind of break down how do we do this, but in each area of the field. And it kind of builds, you can see how it kind of builds on itself. So the big idea, you can break that down into these smaller ideas, and then in each phase you can break that down into even smaller bits.
Yeah, I know there's no word here that's not deliberate, so I'm going to ask you cleanly. Why have you put the word cleanly in there?
Yeah, again, this goes down to control. If you build out and it's just sort of haphazard and you're playing difficult passes for teammates to control, or if the ball is bouncing and it's going to be hard to, if you don't, for me, again, what's the point of this is to get into the middle third or the front half. And if you don't do it cleanly, then you're not going to have control. And again, for me, it's about control and being able to at least be in control of. Are you always going to be in control of the ball or be in control of the game necessarily? No, but you need to be in control of your actions, if that makes sense. So sometimes the most controlled thing you can do is play a long ball from the center back in behind for the winger to run onto. And if all else fails, at least we lose the ball higher up the field, and we're not losing it in our own defensive third because we tried to build out in a way that isn't clean and causes problems, either because the opponent's pressing too high or because we're not positioned well, or simply because the players that I have maybe aren't good enough at what I want them to do. So I think that's, again, it goes back to that idea of control.
High percentage
chances behind the last opposition line of defense to score goals.
Talk us through a little bit about then what you would classify as high percentage.
Yeah, so again, this is a lot of research has been done on this, and I'm sure everybody who listens to this knows it, or you can find it pretty easily. But the ideas of just playing the ball into a wide area and just lumping it into the box are a little bit dated at this point. We've found that higher percentage areas include those box cross zones, and if you are going to play a ball from the wide areas, how do you do it in terms of early crosses in behind the back line? The idea here is getting the ball into areas where you have a higher likelihood of creating a goal scoring chance. And again, this is the research that goes into this. You got the XG and XA now, expected assists as well. That's kind of what this is getting at, is finding those areas and being able and willing to maybe take some risk and potentially lose the ball to create a 70% chance instead of taking the 20% chance that's in front of you.
And then set pieces in the middle of a diagram. How much or how often is that worked on? Is it match day -1? Is it full course of the season? Or
yeah, in preseason, if you have one, or such as it is the preseason, it's a little bit more. So maybe at the end of every session or every couple of sessions. So if you're working on an attacking tactical session, at the end, maybe do some attacking set pieces. Same with defending. Just again, for every player to understand the structure and the principles behind what you're trying to do in that phase of the game. And again, you start really basic and say, here's our framework, serve a ball in, let's try to get some good service and good runs into these areas and see if we can do well. And then again, if you have time and the ability, then you layer on top of that and go, okay, so now we've talked about the basic structure, we've talked about the areas we want the runs to hit, but now we need to talk about, okay, maybe we'll change this, and this runner goes to your different plays, your different set plays. So at the beginning of the season, I tend to start with one, usually, And then from there you branch out and you go, okay, here's a second one, here's a third one. And then I usually try to save something and try to do, maybe something a little bit more creative for the playoffs if you make it that far.
This one here is, again, this attacking principle. What jumped out to me here is 1.3. So how many 1 points are there?
So within each, you have your macro principle, which is the big idea, and then principle 1, 2, and 3 is basically just the thirds of the field. So this is principle 1 is the defensive third, and so this is the third layer of that principle in the defensive third, and there are 5 in each sub principle, I guess you could call it. So this one is 1.3. 1.1 is positioning. So how do we structure ourselves on goal kicks specifically? Because that's the kind of initial, if you think about build up, the very basic, where can you start? You start with a goal kick. Number 2, so 1.2 is a long controlled pass if possible. And it's another one of our basic principles I try to hammer into the team, is to play as long as possible but as short as necessary. Because again, if say you have a mismatch and your right winger, your 7 is way faster than the number 3 on the other team, then sure, you're going to play the ball maybe in behind and just let them run until they figure out how to neutralize that. So that's why when you look at principle, you look at the text, it says play out under control through the center backs when a longer pass is not possible. So if you can, you play a longer pass. Let's break the first line. Let's get in behind as quickly as we can. Again, under control. And you can see, again, play out under control. Focus the build up centrally, +1 numerical advantage. Again, there's a lot of words on here, but these are mostly for me. So when I'm looking at building a training session, I'll come and look at this slide and I'll say, okay, we're going to work on this idea of playing out under control. So what do we really need to make sure we hit in this training session? All right, well, the coaching points. So we need to focus the build up centrally. Okay, there needs to be a +1 numerical advantage. And again, multiple options. So we talked about having options to advance. And then the reason why we want to play centrally instead of wide is to avoid the obvious wide pressing triggers and traps. I think it's probably one of the most basic ones that anybody has now. Ball goes wide to the left back, the right winger cuts it off, the striker cuts the field in half, and now you're trapped. So to avoid that. And then from there, I guess these are the sub principles. How do you play out against 0 or 1 pressing opponents? So if the team is not really pressing high against you, how do you play out against 2 or more, right? And then from there, the last point there that's kind of covered by our faces right now is about the fullbacks and how we use our fullbacks in the build-up to provide initial width and depth ideally behind the line of the wingers, but then invert so they come inside or check down to support at the right moment. So to create overloads behind that first line of pressure, meaning if the 9 pressures the center back and the winger stays wide and there's a gap that they can go into, okay, then go inside and maybe receive that ball in behind that first line if you have to. So if the opponent's really centrally focused, we played against a team that played with a diamond in the middle, and there was no way we were going to get inverted fullbacks inside of those wide players in the diamond. Okay, then maybe they stay wide and they check down to offer that support instead in that situation. So that's that last bullet point there.
This would be a session plan, what that would look like?
Yeah, so these are ideas. These are exercises that we did. This is kind of the third phase of training, both of these. They're the same game. The only difference is the numbers. So in the one on the left here, we have an 8v8 +3, just because of the numbers we had available in training. So we had neutral wingers, and we had our number 6 as a neutral because we only had 19 players that day in training. Versus on the right side here, it's 11v11, and you can see both teams have their own wingers, both teams have their own 6, and we actually had 1 extra player. So we had 23 players available that day. We had 1 rotation in the center back there, which is what the initials inside the parentheses are. So you can see kind of how we structure those as well, where the little number 1 on the red center back on the top of the first of the second exercise there. The number 1 means, okay, after the first set, this guy comes in for this guy. And then at the bottom there, you can see the guy who came out comes back in after the second set. And we play 3 sets, as you can see kind of at the top there.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Let's take a look at training clips. This should play here. Very well animated. So is this the game that you were talking about?
Yeah, so this is the game. This is the 8v8 plus 3. So you can see the guys in green. We have a winger on the outside, each side, and the number 6 in the middle. This is, again, when we didn't have as many players available. And you can see in each, the animation there is in each third, the players and the restrictions that they have. Same thing here. Second clip, there's the inverted fullback. Okay, behind the line of pressure here, so finding ways to get behind the line. One thing I really wish that we had done better this year is use the third man. We had a lot of turning. We had a lot of turning actions and a lot of different, instead of just bumping the ball off to somebody who's facing forward. Now this one's the 11v11. So there's the back 4, midfield 3, and front 3. And again, in each third, you can see how in the wide areas, there's, each team has wingers. The colors aren't as clear on this because it was actually a sunny day instead of a cloudy day. So the film isn't quite as clear on that one. But the idea is behind that one. So that's just showing the different thirds and the restrictions of the players' movement and their starting positions, and then how you take it from. So if you just freeze it on this right there, you can see how in each third we have, so here we have our 2 center backs against the number 9, and each team has the same thing, but it'll show on the other. So if you go and freeze it on the yellow on the middle third there, you can see how each team has their fullbacks and the midfielders. So the 2 attacking mids, and then the guy in green in the middle is the 6, the wide wingers who kind of provide width to the whole field. And then again, the next one is just the final third on the other side, 2 center backs against the 9 for the other team. And the way that we do this is, again, this is all based on the game model and what we want to see. So the outside backs can drop back to defend in their own box, but they can't go wide. They have to stay central. The wingers, you can see here, will be able to cut inside. So once he receives the ball, he can cut inside. And on the far side here, you can see the winger starting to creep in. He actually ends up scoring the goal in this clip. He cuts in, all right? Looking for, again, the box cross area. This guy had a really good finish from this area, actually. He could actually score goals like this quite often. So he was one exception where maybe you want players to cross the ball, but I told him you can shoot from there because he could score. So, and then again, we talk about building behind the line of pressure, superiority behind the line of pressure. Little combination. That's our outside back receiving in the final third there, inverted outside back. So just a couple of different ideas of what it might look like in training. And again, this is the 11v11. There's the back 4, the midfield 3, and the front 3. So each team has 11 players in this one.
When you're coaching this, like what's the coaching behaviors? Like, are you more let them play, discuss at breaks, or are you hands on at that moment in time?
The first couple of times you do it, it's a little bit more confusing for players, these ideas of the zonal restrictions and again why. So that's where I become a little bit more hands on. At the beginning, I'll let them play for a couple minutes and then find a moment to freeze it and walk in and actually show them why they need to be structured the way that they're structured and how it'll give them success. That, again, those clips I picked there are from a couple of times we did those games at the end of the season, toward the end of the season. If we picked a couple from the beginning of the season, it would have been a lot slower, probably a lot fewer completed passes, honestly, probably a little bit more frustration from all parts. But again, the reason that we do it is because we have the final picture in mind of what it's going to look like if we continue to get better at it. And so the coaching behavior in the beginning is a little bit more hands-on. It's a little bit more, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's why. okay, pass this ball out here. Now you can see the different options, option 1, 2, and 3. Okay, pick one. That's, kind of the process that we talked about earlier. And then later in the season, once they understand it, you just sort of let it flow. You go, okay, we're doing this game. You guys know the rules. Play. And they play through it. There's still moments where you freeze it and you go, okay, here's really an area of emphasis for this game coming up. We really want to exploit this space. Or reminders, it's check for understanding. So if maybe they slip back into an old pattern or a behavior that isn't what we wanted, then we go, okay, remember, we need this in this area. We need this player to be positioned here so that we can do this. Little reminders if you need to. And then by the end of it, you just sort of take the restrictions away and go, all right, just play now. Ideally, you start with more restriction, and then it gets more and more free as the season goes on and as the session goes on as well.
Brilliant. And then match clips, when it all comes together.
Ideally. It all comes together. So here's our initial superiority, right? You can pause it there, where you can see our initial structure. We have the goalkeeper, the 2 center backs. The outside backs are mostly inside the width of the box, so kind of in those half spaces, and we have our 6, and it's against 4 players. So we're playing, kind of looking at a 5v4 here in terms of, a 6v4 here in terms of the way we want to play out. So if you let it run until the next little animation there. There's our fullbacks, just highlighted in green, because again, we want them to come inside at the right moments.
Yeah, what are those right moments? Like, what do you have starting points, or is that just irrelevant to or the relation of the opponent's structure?
A little bit has to do with the opponent's structure. A little bit of it has to do with, so when the ball is on the opposite side, so when the ball goes to the left here, go ahead and play it. Ball goes to the left center back. You can pause it when he gets the ball. You can see our right back has started to come inside in that half space there. And again, those are our outside backs in the green. Yeah. So, and again, here's our structure. That's 6v4. Here we don't play out of it. This one's a longer pass. So again, if we can do a controlled longer pass first, we will. We'll look for it. So here we find the winger. And there's our front 3 and our midfield 3. Find the winger who finds the 9. We get in control and in behind the line. Okay, it doesn't work out, but because of the numbers we have back, we're able to control the second ball and then play out, again, under control, looking to get in behind the last line here. Get a little bit fortunate, but sometimes you need a little bit of luck. Second one here. Here's that structure again. So you can see the 6, the 6 players. So we have our 2 center backs, the goalkeeper, the number 6, and the 2 outside backs. You can see the outside backs are inside the half spaces again. So their starting position is a bit narrower. And we're always looking, ideally, like our right back here, to get in behind their winger and stay in a position where we can break the line with a pass to them. Here, I think we find the 6 to build out of it. All right, so we break that line, that initial line, and you can see the space that we have in behind their midfielders as well. And this little interchange I like a lot. So you can see where the winger, so first of all, you can see how our attacking midfielders have a lot of space in behind their midfield line and in front of the back line. So that was something that we looked to exploit in this game. And then here we have a little interchange. Having the outside back stay narrow and deeper allows the attacking midfielders to make runs like this where they can stay higher. They're not so concerned about coming back and finding the ball off of the back line. They're more concerned about how can I get in behind in these areas. So the winger checks, draws the outside back, that opens space for the attacking midfielder to make a run in the channel behind. Nice little combination, interchange, find the winger on the opposite side. The outside back inverted, gets involved in the play, and create a good goal-scoring opportunity there. Okay, so this is more second phase. So first one was more build-up. Second one is a little bit more middle third, so from the back third into the middle third here. Now we create a 3-line with our 6 dropping in, lets the center back step in. And again, you can see we're looking long first. You can see the center back has his head up. We always want to play long first if we can. You can see, underneath that as well, we're looking to find the ball. If you look up and you look longer, you can see the stuff that's underneath. If you're only looking at what's right in front of you, then you're not going to see the pictures farther upfield. So here you can see the back line of the other team's pretty high, and we've got them stretched out pretty well in that 4v3. And so we can get in behind. This is what I was talking about. We can play a long ball from the center back to the winger and create a chance. I'm still not convinced that didn't go in, by the way. Then why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And then here, this example, the next example that comes up is a little bit more condensed. The opponent is a little bit deeper in terms of more of a middle block shape. They're a little bit deeper on the field, and how do we create those advantages still? So here, it's not really possible to play longer pass in behind, but we can play through their lines. There's the 10 receiving in that space that we talked about before. Okay, so you can see our structure here in the half spaces with the outside backs really narrow in this clip. The attacking midfielder is really high, and that's actually our 9 coming deep to find the ball. So because the attacking midfielders are looking to stretch the play and go higher, our 9 can now come deeper and look to find the ball underneath and create a 1v1 wide with the winger. And you can also see that with the outside backs pinched in, it also gives you a good structure to prevent the counterattack if and when you lose the ball in the final third. So here the ball goes to the winger. The outside backs are really narrow, and the center backs obviously are deeper than that. So we have a really good structure to win second balls and clearances and be able to seal the play in the front half.
Yeah, I imagine it's got to be very, very difficult for opponents to get out of that as well, right? With the counter pressing and so many central spaces are blocked.
Yeah, structurally, we were set up pretty well to counter press. I thought in terms of the player behavior and intentions, we didn't look to trigger the counter press well enough. The two areas that I would have liked for us to be better. Number one is those third man actions that we talked about. So being able to play the way you face, and instead of trying to always turn and play through defenders, to be able to bump the ball off to somebody who's facing forward, just to keep the speed of play high. I would have liked for us to be better at that. I also would have liked for us to be a little bit stronger in our counter pressing. We were good at reorganizing ourselves defensively. So when we lost the ball, it was easier for us to drop into more of a defensive structure, not necessarily dropping all the way to our goal, but at least dropping into a defensive structure versus counter pressing and winning the ball back high. It just wasn't really a player behavior that we managed to trigger very often. And it was, maybe it just wasn't something that the players that we had were used to doing. Maybe they were a little bit more used to dropping back and just getting a structure. But that ended up being how we prevented counterattacks a little bit more. Toward the end of the season, we consciously, I think it was a conversation I had with one of the assistant coaches, and say, well, we still need here's a good moment where we could counter press. And I just told him, I said, that ship has sailed this year. We're not a counter pressing team. We're a team that when we lose the ball, we drop into our structure and we look to defend, just because we'd worked on it. We tried to do it and it just wasn't working. So again, there's no need to try to force something that's not going to work, because then you end up with half the team doing it, half the team not doing it, and maybe you get played through way too easily. So
yeah,
got to understand when you have to compromise on things that maybe you don't want to necessarily, but you have to because of the way the season unfolds or the group that you have in front of you.
Yeah, defensive transition is very, very difficult to have anyone not on the same page, right? Yeah. If it's pressure around the ball or if it's your back line, and if there's any indecision, it can be costly. Yeah. Fantastic. That was really, really good to go through what that process is from start, and then obviously even some of those training clips as well. You said it, I think in the middle of the chat, it's all related. It's strengthening those connections. I think that was the first answer you had. Mm-hmm. Almost going back to there, if the connection is that game idea you talk about, if it's strengthened throughout the training sessions, then all of a sudden you've got a better chance of landing that with shorter periods of time to prepare.
Yeah, I mean, every football action, every training exercise includes kind of what we would traditionally call those tactical components, right? So there's two aspects that go into it: the framework of the team and the individual cues. And obviously football is a team sport and not an individual one. So we need to have that kind of action, language, and understanding at the team level to increase that mutual understanding and awareness between players. And training should be aimed at fine-tuning and perfecting that communication and those, communication, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, tactical understanding. Every part of a football action depends on that quality communication. So, being able to coordinate 2 or more players' individual game insight at the team level, that's what tactics is. That's what communication is. So their understanding, their individual understanding, if one brain is here, the other brain is here, their individual understanding has to coincide. So it has to be in sync. It requires that interaction, exchange of information. So it requires the framework up here that tells them, here's what we're trying to do. And then it requires them doing it. And okay, I see. So when he does this, I do this, and there's really an understanding to really get the players in sync, and that's why this component is of the highest order in football. So superior communication can compensate for a lack of ability in other areas, and high ability in other areas can't always replace this mutual understanding. So that's a fancy way of saying that individual players must have a high level, but that doesn't always mean that you're going to win if you come up against a team that has a better understanding and can work better together, has better chemistry. Generally speaking, unless the individual level of this team is that much higher that they're still better, then the team that has the superior communication can and often does overcome a team that's just individually better. And like you said, whenever possible, these players and units, your back line, your midfield, whatever, they should be trained together to maximize that mutual understanding. So even in possession games, if you do a 4v4+3, it's not a random 4. It's not a random selection of players who are grouped together. It's the players that you need to kind of develop that understanding and that chemistry and overload their communication among those players. So the development of that communication, verbal, nonverbal, that understanding, that chemistry, it's maximized. The players who play together also train together. And again, no wasted time. Exercises are position specific. It's not random, like, let's just get here 5 guys go throw on purple bibs. That's why you look at those session plans. The initials of the players, every exercise is like that, where it doesn't matter if it's a really basic possession exercise, doesn't matter if it's a passing exercise or whatever. All the groups, the rondos, even the groups of players that you need to have that understanding are grouped together. And maybe it's not necessarily your midfielders, your defenders, your forwards are all together. Maybe you throw a couple of players together who, hey, these guys are going to be really important for the team. They need to work well together. They need to understand each other. So we're going to throw them together. So that's kind of the gist behind that, the training methodology and ideas there.
Brilliant. No, it's a great way to finish, because you get a lot, especially today with Canva, you get a lot of glossy game models, and then you don't really know whether they're going out and doing really anything that's tactically deliberate or related to what their objectives are. But when it's very rare that you can look and get an insight to what you're doing here as an insight to the whole season, with a lot of honesty and a lot of modesty on where you're trying to get better and what you're trying to build. Fantastic. I've loved it.
No, I've enjoyed sharing that. That's good. I think it's really important for coaches to be willing and able to share information. I think Pep Linders at Liverpool always says it, right? It raises the general level of understanding and coaching, and if people are willing to exchange ideas, and there's always this fear of, if I do this, then people are going to know what I'm trying to do, and that's only a problem if you're not evolving. It's only a problem if you're not always getting better. It's always again, next year's crop of players that I have to work with will probably be completely different. So what we do will probably look somewhat similar, hopefully, because it's the same idea, but the way that we do it will probably be vastly different. So that exchange of information is something that I think is important to embrace, and something that I've always enjoyed.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks. Enjoyed it.